Good morning, all. Good afternoon to our colleagues who are joining us from PNG. Thank you for joining this webinar regarding human rights in Papua New Guinea, addressing implementation of UPR recommendations. We are going to give a few more minutes to other registrants to join the webinar. We will start in a couple of minutes. A few reminders before we get started. First, as a participant, your microphones and cameras has been automatically blocked in order to avoid the background noise that may disrupt the session and prevent other participants from hearing the speakers. To ask a question during the session, please type into the questions and answers box. Whether possible, we will activate your microphones to allow you to address your question. As an alternative, I will be happy to read the questions to the panelists. When typing your questions, please indicate your name and the name of your organization and indicate to which panelist specifically your question is addressed, both in the Q&A box and if you take the floor. Simultaneous interpretation in English and French will be available during this webinar. Please select the interpretation channel you prefer by clicking on the little globe at the bottom of your screen. Finally, this webinar will be recorded and a few photos will be taken for communication purposes after the event. Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation. I now officially open the webinar. So again, welcome everybody. My name is Maria Donofrio. As a Secretary General of the International Catholic Center of Geneva, it is my honor to act as moderator of this event that the CCG organized jointly with Dominicans for Justice and Peace, Human Rights International, and the Marist International Solidarity Foundation. I also take this opportunity to extend my thank you to the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Caritas Internationalis, Istituto Internazionale Maria Ausiliatrice, Ocean Dialogue, and the Catholic Bishop Conference in PNG for co-sponsoring this event, as well as the City of Geneva and Miss Ankara, not only for their financial support, but also for their continuous assistance for the realization of this initiative. This event is a part of a larger project aiming to enhance capacities of human rights defenders in Papua New Guinea. In particular, a coalition of 16 local civil society organizations was supported in the past few months in order to engage in the UPR of the country, which took place on November 4th. Two of our local partners are present today in the panel of this event, together with the representatives from the PNG government, the delegation of the European Union in PNG, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. I thank you all of them for joining us today. This is therefore a precious opportunity to address many human rights concerns in PNG with some very distinguished panelists and particularly discuss the implementation of UPR recommendations made to PNG in its third UPR, while looking for concrete opportunities for collaboration in the implementation efforts. Without taking more time, I would like now to give the floor to our panelists, starting with Ms. Mu Begura, Acting Director of the International Organization Branch, Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade of Papua New Guinea. Ms. Begura was part of the PNG delegation for the UPR session held on November 4th. We are very pleased to have you among us today. Ms. Begura, you have the floor.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Fellow panelists, representatives of civil society and faith-based organizations, and distinguished delegates and guests. Good evening to those of you in Papua New Guinea, and a very good morning to the rest of you joining us in Geneva and other parts of the world. I am from the Department of Foreign Affairs, but we've been fully involved in the UPR reporting process for Papua New Guinea. As such, I will be speaking on behalf of, we'll be representing the government in this session. With that, I am very pleased to join you all in this important dialogue as we discuss how we can work together to safeguard human rights in Papua New Guinea by finding the best way forward in implementing UPR recommendations. I take this opportunity also to thank the International Catholic Center in Geneva and Madam Moderator for organizing this event and for extending the invitation to the government of Papua New Guinea to be part of this important conversation. Madam Moderator, I have only a few remarks to reflect on, and this regards the process of the National UPR Task, the National UPR Task Force has undertaken over the last 12 months in putting together and presenting to the UN Human Rights Council Papua New Guinea's National UPR report on the third UPR cycle. This reflection is important as it reiterates the statement made by the PNG head of delegation to the 39th session of the UN Human Rights Council and UPR review report on the 4th of November this month. It provides the basis of the government's position on important domestic and international frameworks and mechanisms of support systems which need strengthening as we progress towards implementation of PNG's third UPR cycle recommendations and an outcome of the UN UPR working group report, which is envisioned to be released in the next couple of weeks. Madam Moderator and distinguished guests, in the absence of a functional National Human Rights Commission, the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade has been responsible for the task of making sure PNG fulfill its obligations as a state party to the UN and other international organizations that it affiliates to, especially in providing national review reports on implementation of certain commitments as required by this organization. The UPR report on the status of human rights situation in the country is one of these reports which we are discussing in this meeting. It is important to note that Papua New Guinea's third UPR cycle report focuses on a number of thematic issues, including membership of international treaties and conventions, updates on implementing domestic policies or enactment of relevant domestic laws, establishment of national institutions and mechanisms, and specific areas such as rights of women, rights of the child, rights of persons living with disability, and cross-cutting issues such as human rights and the environment. Overall, providing the leadership of the UPR task force in the reporting process has also strengthened our understanding of the challenges encountered by the government in implementing the two previous reviews in 2011 and 2016. We envision similar challenges ahead in implementing the third cycle recommendations. Having stated this, Madam Moderator, the government recognizes that to safeguard the human rights of all citizens within its geographical jurisdiction would require effectively aligning international human rights commitments with the implementation of domestic legal and policy frameworks that are aimed at improving the integral development of our society. The government also recognizes that in order for this to work, there needs to be a renewed level of collaboration at all levels of society, and for all parties involved to consent to combined efforts and shared information and resources. Otherwise, our good intentions and efforts will remain redundant. Noting this, the government's bid to strengthen domestic mechanisms and international frameworks which will drive effective implementation of the third cycle of UPR recommendations currently faces the following major challenges. First of all, our foremost challenge now remains with an inadequate understanding of what constitutes human rights and the significance of protection and promotion of these rights in order to build and sustain peaceful societies. There is a need for an all of society education and awareness on human rights, including the integral rights of an individual as a human being, his or economic, social, cultural, and spiritual development rights. Only with greater awareness and appropriate education on these rights will our citizens appreciate, respect, protect, and promote their own rights to life and development, and the rights of other members of the society to achieve the same. This awareness must be both systematic and systemic if we are to change the attitude of our society and improve the status of human rights in our society. And part of this awareness will include educating citizens of their rights to protection under the different domestic laws and policies and similar international standards that apply to these rights. Secondly, the government struggles with the problem of effectively implementing domestic human rights laws and policies. The same challenges extend to implementation of international frameworks and mechanisms that meet human rights standards at a global level. There are a myriad of factors at work to obstruct effective implementation of existing domestic laws and policies that will otherwise change the current status of human rights situation for the better. A malfunctioning governance system and political interference are but only a few obvious stumbling blocks government agencies are up against in their efforts to effectively implement UPR recommendations. Third, there is also a disconnect in the domestic governance of efforts by all parties involved in the implementation of UPR recommendations, leading to duplication of roles, inability to share vital information and that data, and most importantly, the lack of collaboration between society and government. Our biggest hurdle has been the inability to work together, although we serve the same interests. If we desire to improve our efforts to safeguard human rights in Papua New Guinea from here on, we need to agree here and now to work together for a better outcome of the fourth UPR report in 2025. Fourth, the government faces major challenges in appropriately managing resources to complement the work of the civil society and relevant government agencies. This can only improve with greater awareness and advocacy at the political level to ensure mainstreaming of physical planning and target improving current human rights issues and policies. For example, implementation of the GESI in the workplace, budget appropriation for improving safe house infrastructure and resources for GBV survivors, and many other examples that we can think of. Specific budget and resource allocation for implementation of issues will only happen with a well-informed political leadership that is committed and willing to bring about reformation and change that impacts positively on society. The final challenge that we have realized during this reporting cycle is the fact that there is a need for better coordination and control of the domestic implementation of work programs of development partners in the country. This is to avoid duplication of roles and to ensure closer working relationship between national coordination points and development partners. This is key to ensure government is aware of the roles development partners are playing, and if these roles align and complement national socioeconomic development strategies for improving human rights conditions in the country. There is a need for effective collaboration between civil society organizations and the relevant government agencies. If we are serious about improving the human rights situation in this country, we need to somehow find a middle ground to compromise on and work together for the good of our citizens. Madam Moderator, having noted about challenges, the government is currently working on an implementation plan we want to share with all stakeholders, including development partners. In the next couple of weeks before the festive season, the UPR task force will meet to discuss and plan for the next 4 years, from 2022 to 2025. An important part of this planning will include setting deadlines for stakeholder consultations at the regional and provincial levels. Our focus will be on forging channels of ongoing networking and open dialogue with the civil society, especially human rights workers nationwide, and to develop a stakeholder mapping to help us work towards 2025. The task force will also discuss on the areas of support the government will need and how best we can work with the civil society and development partners to implement recommendations of PNG's third UPR cycle report. In closing, I echo the comments by the Papua New Guinea delegation, by the head of the Papua New Guinea delegation during the presentation of the third UPR report on 4 November by reiterating that the government recognizes the work of the civil society and faith-based organizations amongst our citizens, and we value the immense contributions to human rights work in the country. The government is committed to working in collaboration with these agencies and the UN system through the resident office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Port Moresby. We greatly appreciate the support of all our partners during the consultation and in compiling the National UPR report this year. We look forward to continue this partnership and to work closely with them all in implementing the third cycle of UPR recommendations. I thank you.
Thank you indeed, Ms. Begura, for your intervention. It is very good to hear about the commitment that the government, and in particular the Department of Foreign Affairs, has with its leadership role is playing, and especially in planning the implementation of the recommendation received. It's also very important how you stress the importance of collaboration with all sectors of the society. We feel this is truly the right way forward in order to achieve a better implementation. It's also, I guess, very honest from your side and from all of us to recognize that the UPR provides indeed an opportunity also to look deeper into the human rights issues that we face in each country and find for concrete solutions to resolve and address those issues. Obviously, in doing so, there are a few challenges that we all may encounter. You have mentioned some, like the disconnect sometimes in the domestic government's efforts, the challenge in managing vital resources, specific budget and resource allocation, which is always a matter of concern everywhere. But you also have announced already as a concrete opportunity to collaborate the effort made by the government for putting up an implementation plan. This is very encouraging to hear, and also your willingness to share this plan with all other stakeholders is definitely something that provide us with a basis for concrete collaborations in the future. So thank you very much for outlining all these very important elements. I now would like to give the floor to our next speaker, Mrs. Priscilla Kare, representative of the Callan Services for People with Disability National Unit in PNG. Priscilla, your NGO is particularly committed to the protection of the rights of people with disability in your country through inclusive education and community-based rehabilitation services. Thank you for your participation in this panel, Priscilla, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dear colleagues, it is my pleasure to intervene in this distinguished panel to present the main concerns of our coalition of 16 local civil society organizations concerning the rights of children, women, and people with disabilities in Papua New Guinea. Supported by the CCIG, Dominicans for Justice and Peace, ERI, and FMSI, this local NGO coalition made a joint submission for the third UPR of Papua New Guinea, focusing on women and children's rights, the rights of people with disabilities, as well as environmental protection. As a result, several recommendations were addressed to PNG during its third Universal Periodic Review held on November 4th, in some cases reiterating recommendations already made in the second UPR of 2016. With regard to women's rights, participation in parliament, politics, and decision-making is very limited in Papua New Guinea. In fact, no women had been elected in 2017 into the current parliament. The upcoming 2022 elections constitute a key time to implement measures to favor the number of female candidates and the number of women elected to be elected. Gender-based violence is also a big issue in Papua New Guinea, which led the government to adopt a national strategy 2016 to 2025 to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. However, this strategy is not fully implemented yet. Provincial secretariats in charge of various activities to prevent and fight GBV have yet to be established in our provinces. The government took several measures to fight against domestic violence, such as adoption of the Family Protection Act 2013, criminalizing domestic violence and creating family protection orders, the creation of National Family Sexual Violence Action Committee, the establishment of family and sexual violence units, and the setup of family support centers. However, many issues are still being faced at the implementation level. Belief in sorcery is also widespread across PNG. In some places, persons accused of sorcery are then victims of physical violence, including torturing, which can lead to their deaths. Despite several actions taken to fight this phenomenon, many cases are still documented. As a result of the third UPR of PNG, 13 recommendations were addressed to the government concerning gender equality and women's rights to participation, and 21 recommendations concerning the eradication of violence against women, including sorcery accusation-related violence, in addition to specific recommendations aimed at reinforcing women's protection through ratification of international instruments. We call upon the government of Papua New Guinea to accept these recommendations and move towards implementation as soon as possible. With regard to children's rights, and in particular their right to education, an early childhood education policy had been launched in the new this year and is included in the new National Education 2020 to 2029 to be implemented. However, it will not be funded under the government's tuition fee subsidy policy. Accessibility to primary and secondary education is a major issue, partly due to the remote locations of many schools and to the lack of resources and trained teachers. Moreover, the current government of Papua New Guinea's tuition fee policy calls for half the fees to be paid by the parents. As for tertiary institutions, many students cannot secure a place or are forced to withdraw because of the cost of tuition fees, despite the higher education loan program. Concerning children's right to health, low awareness of health and hygiene practices combined with difficulties in accessing adequate health services and facilities contribute to high incidence of illness and disease and a high rate of infant and maternal mortality, particularly impacting children in rural areas. A child health policy and plan 2009 to 2020 was adopted, but no report on its outcomes was published. In March 2020, the National Department of Health prepared an emergency preparedness and response plan COVID-19 with an estimated budget of 93 million kina. Regarding juvenile justice, children in conflict with the law face many challenges and violation of their rights that mainly results from the lack of training of police officers. Juvenile court officers were established to handle cases of juvenile offenders. Regardless, many children in conflict with the law are detained, not always separately from adults, not offered access to diversion alternatives. Violence against children also persists as a major challenge in PNG. In a 2019 report, Save the Children documented that around 75% of the child population experience violent discipline at home. To strengthen child protection, PNG adopted a new Lookout in Pikanini Act in 2015. However, many measures are yet to be implemented. As a result of the recent UPR of PNG, 18 recommendations were addressed to PNG government concerning children's rights, most of them highlighting the need to act to fully ensure their right to education and protect them from all forms of violence, in addition to specific recommendations aimed at reinforcing the existing legal framework through ratification of the international instruments. Once again, we call upon the government of Papua New Guinea to accept these recommendations and promptly act towards their effective implementation. Concerning the rights of people with disabilities, it is important to highlight the lack of national disability data management system, so there is no validated figure to present. A national disability policy was launched in 2015. Based on it, a National Disability Authority bill has been developed since 2018, but has not been adopted yet. Among others, children with disabilities do not have access to inclusive education because of lack of adequate infrastructures, but also because out of the 22 provinces in Papua New Guinea, only 5 are engaged in piloting inclusive learning. Discriminations and stigma are common issues that people with disabilities face every day. Many cases of violence against persons with disabilities are being documented, with women and girls with disabilities seen as the most vulnerable. This situation was even more exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, persons with disabilities face many obstacles to take part in public affairs. First, their information is often not up to date in the Electoral Commission voters registry. Also, the election period is generally very dangerous and unsafe, with voting venues often controlled by tribal warriors. 5 recommendations were addressed to PNG government concerning the rights of people with disabilities during the last UPR. We call upon the government of Papua New Guinea to accept them and collaborate with all stakeholders for their implementation. Finally, considering the above, we recognize that several safeguarding measures for protection of human rights of women, children, and people with disabilities have been developed in 2016. However, much still needs to be accomplished with regard to full and effective implementation of these protection measures. We call upon the government of Papua New Guinea to make the best of its recent review, to seize the opportunity to improve the human rights situation in the country through acceptance of the relevant recommendations it received on November 4th, and ensuring full commitment to implement them in the next 4 years. As civil society organizations committed for human rights in Papua New Guinea, we will continue supporting any positive actions undertaken by the government to grant children, women, and people with disabilities the full exercise of their rights in Papua New Guinea. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Priscilla, for your contribution that indeed highlighted several human rights challenges. I will mention just some of them. Concerning women's rights, there is the participation of women, which is a matter of concern, as well as gender-based violence, including violence based on sorcery-based accusation. The right to education, in terms especially of accessibility, it's also a matter of a concern, together with violence suffered by children, and obviously with regard to people with disability, the lack of a national disability data management system, as well as the discrimination and stigma that this particular vulnerable group face every day, are also something we should pay special attention to. Thank you also for highlighting how civil society organizations are willing to offer support and collaborative efforts to truly address those issues together with the government and other stakeholders in PNG. I'm now moving to the next speaker on my list, Reverend Roger Joseph, General Secretary of the PNG Council of Churches. Reverend Roger, we are aware of the commitment and the great work of the churches in PNG for environmental protection. We therefore look forward for hearing from you on this crucial topic, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Please, microphone. Please, Reverend, your microphone, please. Okay. Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Sorry. There is another microphone in the room, please. Okay, now, please, Reverend. Okay, you can speak.
You guys just double check. Nobody's on. Madam Moderator and the colleagues, I will be speaking on the environmental issues in Papua New Guinea. In my capacity as General Secretary of Papua New Guinea Council of Churches, it is my pleasure to intervene in this panel discussion. Papua New Guinea Council of Churches maintains the World Council of Churches Charter on peace, justice, and integrity of creation. It has actively participated in the NGO coalition who contributed to the UPR of PNG through a written submission. In addition to the human rights issues already detailed by Ms. Curry, our coalition highlighted environmental protection as a priority in Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is the biggest island country in the Pacific, located north of Australia and west of Indonesia. Papua New Guinea has a total land mass of 462,840 square kilometers, 85% of which is customary land and 15% state-owned. It has a total population of 8 million people with 800 languages and about 1,000 cultures. 80% of this population is rural-based. PNG is rich with natural resources with about 8 major gold and copper mines and 5 minor ones, and records the largest round timber exports in the world. Despite its rich resources, the majority of the rural-based population continues to live in poverty. There is unequal benefit sharing of resource revenue with landowners because of the policy that allows for 100% of ownership of resources by the government for every mineral extracted below 6 feet on every customary land. Further to this is the issue on improper tailing waste management practices to protect the toxic waste from spilling. Again, there is the uncontrolled destruction of rainforest, round timber harvesting under the Special Agriculture Business List, SABL, provision. All this carelessness has resulted in huge environmental damages caused to our land, waterways, and sea. The livelihood of communities living along impacted areas are at high risk with less or no government initiatives and support for sustainability or relocation. Such consequences led, for example, to the 10 years of civil wars in Bougainville, during which 20,000 lives were lost among the PNG military force, the Bougainville Revolutionary Army, BRA, the resistant groups, women and children. Another example relates to the granting of a mining license by PNG government to the Canadian Nautilus Company to mine the seabed in 2019 based on the Land Mining Act. The first mining activity was to take place just off the shores of Madang, where tuna fish migrates out of, but the customary landowners who believe that their livelihood depends on the land and sea and waters formed resistant and resilient groups and protested against the activity. The company so moved to the Duke of York Islands in the East New Britain province and later to the west coast in New Ireland province, where the same resistance was faced. It must be noted here that the people's reactions are not towards stopping development. It is rather towards fearing of losing their deep connection with nature, that is sea and land, and their social connection with neighboring islanders. Papua New Guinea Council of Churches position: we have The churches have always observed that nature is seen by developers and successive governments as an object of exploitation. In this case, nature is seen in relation to humans. That is, that nature is for the good of humans. Little thought is ever given to the perils of environmental destruction. Our leaders should be capable of respecting and building relationship with nature, as we understand that they are locals of Papua New Guinea who too have been locally oriented of their relationship with nature. The ecological crisis now. Wanton destruction has become widely a common cry of the ordinary people of Papua New Guinea. It is a cry of the poor, the cry of the oppressed, the cry of the underprivileged and the marginalized. The churches witness that experiences of deprivation and exploitation our people face is linked with environmental degradation. We see the inevitable consequences of the pattern of development taking place, resulting in ruthless exploitation of nature and fellow human beings, and feel that we must speak out now. The development context of the day has created a springboard for our discussion and intervention. We see our role more in terms of being responsible, being accountable, and being answerable. In this pursuit, the churches have three following commitments. Firstly, we are committed to a vision of human wholeness, which includes not only our relationship with one another, but also with nature and the universe. Secondly, we are committed to the struggle of the transformation of the poor, the weak, the disfigured, and the overexploited nature. And thirdly, we are committed to rebuilding a culture on values that can live in harmony with the creation's integrity. This is why we welcome that during the third Universal Periodical Review of Papua New Guinea, 9 recommendations were addressed to our government concerning environmental issues. These were recommendation number 6.58 to 6.66, with explicit references to business activities and its impact of the enjoyment of the human rights in Papua New Guinea, which were also made. We urge the Papua New Guinea government to accept these recommendations and pay the utmost importance of their implications. In doing so, it should be assured that churches and civil society remain available to work hand in hand with the government for a better protection of the environment. We churches are committed to be more responsible today for tomorrow, then we blame tomorrow for what we say and do today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Roger. You have highlighted environmental protection as a priority in PNG, stressing some specific crucial issues such as the unequal benefit sharing of resource value, the improper tailing waste management, mining, and other issues that obviously have a very strong negative impact on the survival of the communities, local communities in the country. We hear your call for more commitment, and we also take note of your offer to contribute to that, to continue the struggle to improve regarding the situation regarding those issues in PNG. Thank you very much for your contribution. I would like now to give the floor to Dr. Silvio Jora, Chargé d'Affaires of the EU delegation in PNG. We are very pleased to have you with us today, presenting an international perspective on some crucial human rights issues in PNG. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. So, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Thank you for inviting the EU delegation to this debate in the aftermath of the UPR review of PNG. I would say it's not necessarily an international perspective, but a European perspective. I hope that, okay, at least we are on the same line with most of the other international partners. I believe so. So first of all, I would like to express our appreciation for the great work undertaken by the International Catholic Center of Geneva and its partners in monitoring the human rights in PNG, also for liaising with the local grassroots organization and human rights defenders, and for providing outreach and advocacy work towards the diplomatic community and the national authorities. Please free to outreach and to reach us whenever you think it's necessary, because your information, particularly the information collected at the grassroots level, it's extremely valuable for us. In fact, the advocacy meeting we had on the 28th of June helped us a lot in drafting our input to the UPR exercise, to be honest. So we received valuable information from you on the children's rights and rights of the person with disabilities, and particularly useful information on human rights and the environment. As you know, human rights are the heart of the European Union's international engagement. Human rights are part of the founding values of the Union, and therefore in PNG and the protection and promotion of human rights is an absolute horizontal priority for us. Unfortunately, although in PNG all fundamental freedoms are enshrined in the Constitution, the problem is with the institutional capacity for implementation, which is still fragile, as is recognized by the representatives of the authorities themselves. And as highlighted during the latest UPR exercise, the establishment of a Human Rights Commission, it's still pending, and the country is still to ratify a number of human rights conventions. Again, the issue of the Human Rights Commission is acknowledged by the authorities, so hopefully by next year something will be done, or maybe by 2023 if we consider the electoral period, a period when nothing much will happen. So at the same time, of course, as highlighted in a recent UPR exercise, we're pleased to see that PNG has also made some progress in the latest exercise in 2016. So we're all seeing that PNG has been praised for the recent move in the political level to address human rights and the gender-based violence. The recently established parliamentary coalition against the gender-based violence is a major step into the right direction, we think. And the activities of the NCD governor, the mayor of Port Moresby, are also highly relevant and highly visible. Furthermore, the efforts of the government to increase women participation in politics are also to be praised. And hopefully there will be some results coming out of the forthcoming general elections in 2022. So we'll see more women in politics, more women in parliament, more women participating in the electoral process. And the European Union needs also allocate some money for increasing the level of awareness of the importance in participating in the voting process on the part of women electorate. As reflected by the position of many EU member states in the UPR exercise, PNG is also to be praised for advancement in the fight against corruption, the work to ensure the rights of persons with disabilities, and the ratification of the related convention. The strategy on the sexually transmitted infections, the effort to increase birth registration, the increased access to education, the strategies on promoting sustainable development, and the measures taken to ensure the environmental rights of the local people. So the efforts of the government are visible, they are there, but of course it's not enough. There is still a lot remains to be done, particularly on the implementation side. The declarations are all good, all the right messages. As for the European Union, under the 2021-2027 new framework program of the EU, we are committed to focus more on supporting human rights defenders in PNG because of their importance in reaching to the grassroots level. Therefore, from next year, we have a special program dedicated to supporting the HRDs. On the issue of gender equality and combating gender-based violence, the challenges in PNG remain huge, as has been repeatedly mentioned. There are certain root causes that are not easy to eradicate. So from our part, starting from next year, we intend to particularly focus on empowering the gender-based violence victims to pursue the prosecution of the culprits, which is still a challenge. So many things are already in place, but the prosecution part, the victim do not have the knowledge and the financial capacity to pursue prosecution. So we'll try to help a little bit in this respect. The UPR recommendation on human rights and GBV will be also supported by a new and more ambitious EU gender action plan. Concerning the perpetration of source-related violence and killings in PNG, particularly in the highlands, the EU will also allocate additional resources to combat this highly disturbing phenomenon. So, ladies and gentlemen, I saw that nobody mentioned until now the sensitive issue of death penalty. The EU hopes that the proposed public debate and the move to constitutionally declare PNG a Christian country will lead towards a parliament decision on abolition, or at least a formal moratorium. In August this year, we have witnessed with great concern that the annulment of the temporary orders that since 2017 have stayed the death sentences of 14 prisoners currently on death row, so this annulment might indicate, at least in theory, that the execution could resume 70 years. In theory, I repeat. Furthermore, while we welcome the appointment of the Power of Mercy Committee, which will provide an ultimate chance for clemency, this also could signal further procedural advancements towards the resumption of the executions in case that this ultimate appeal would be rejected, which of course we will unequivocally oppose. Same as in 2016, in 2021, a consistent number of UPR recommendations are with reference to the abolishment of death penalty, and we hope that the PNG authorities will take this seriously and will consider doing something. We would like to see maybe not a radical change, but a gradual change. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not wish to present only a great picture of human rights in PNG, as you have seen in the introduction of my presentation. There are also areas where PNG is doing rather well, such as the freedom of expression. Indeed, PNG has an active and lively press and media ready to expose and condemn human rights violations. And this is to be praised, naturally. Another good point is the very active and participative civil society, particularly the faith-based organizations. And we are looking forward to further partner with them for the effective implementation of the third cycle of UPR recommendations in PNG. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Dr. Jora, for your intervention. Very briefly, you had highlighted the efforts already made by the government of PNG, the ongoing efforts, which are fully recognized. Nevertheless, there are a few challenges that still remain, and we should attentively look at those challenges. Just to mention some among the others, you have raised the point of the institutional capacity for implementation, which remains fragile. You have reminded several human rights issues. First, the women's participation, which we fully support, I must say, the fight against corruption, the challenges of people with disabilities, the crucial role that human rights defenders may play, and the need to support them more. And of course, gender equality and violence also linked to sorcery accusation. Death penalty as well has a crucial issues and a very relevant topic to be raised. Thank you for your contribution again. I will now give the floor to the next and last speaker in our panel, Ms. Josephine Mann. She's the National Human Rights Officer at the Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights. With more than 12 years of experience in addressing human rights issues in PNG, we look forward to your contribution to this panel discussion. So, Josephine, you have the floor, and thank you again.
Good evening from PNG. Thank you, Madam Chair and colleagues. Good morning to our colleagues in Geneva. The presentation that I will give on is basically just a sum up of most of the issues have been addressed by our colleagues and partners in the civil society as well as from the government. The role of the UN PNG country team through the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights is basically supporting the civil society and the government and faith-based organization in reviewing the recommendations of the UPR and how to go about in implementing it. So basically, in a spectrum of a whole perspective, we try to support as much as possible in reviewing recommendations and working towards the next review. So from the previous review on the second cycle, we had received about 108 recommendations. And so during the last cycle of the third cycle, we've been reviewing all these recommendations, and the UN has been working on different thematic areas that have been gathered in this whole 108 recommendations, which was basically looking at the ratification and reporting and the cooperation of treaty bodies, institutions and policies, the implementation of international human rights treaties and obligations. We also look at equality and non-discrimination, administration and access to justice and the rule of law, rights to freedom of opinion and expression and association and assembly, right to life, liberty and security, right to health and sustainable environment, children's rights, and rights of refugees and asylum seekers, and also to maintain stability and peace in Bougainville, which is also our autonomous region as well. And so basically, for in the purpose or interest of time, and to support the work that the civil society has done, going through all the areas that I've mentioned, the UN continues to support equality and non-discrimination. The CEDAW committee expressed concerns about customary laws applied by village courts and the fact that these courts often go beyond the jurisdiction to resolve cases of, say, cases of rape through mediation and compensation payments, or customary laws that may entrench gender inequality, such as arranged marriages. When statutory marriages are subject to formalities under Marriage Act 1962, the division or customary marriages may be deemed to be valid without need to meet formalities. What an opportunity that the UN has seen and hopes to work with the government and the partners is to ratify the CEDAW optional protocol that actually looks at reviewing laws to reveal provisions that are discriminatory against women. We've also worked around and support the government and our partners in the civil society, as well as faith-based organizations, looking at the administration and the access to justice and the rule of law, particularly in family courts and the hearing of majority of cases that revolve around violence against women and violence against children cases. There are several structural barriers to women's access to justice, including distance to court, lack of legal aid, minimum rights, and information that's needed for resources to pay for legal services, and other cultural hindrances. An opportunity based on this recommendation would be to support a gender-responsive justice system to support survivors and equal access to justice, including through training and capacity building, through strengthening the legal system and the law enforcement for the safekeeping of women and children. There has been positive steps that have been taken since the last UPR. In 2019, 2 dedicated gender advisor officers were introduced to the Royal PNG Constabulary, and gender-sensitive trainings have also been conducted in partnership with the government of PNG and the UN, looking at sensitizing the law enforcement in terms of police brutality and gender equality. And the government has made notable progress in establishing this range of core responsive protecting services, such as the Family Sexual Violence Unit and Police Sexual Offences Squad. And And looking at from the juvenile justice system, there's been establishment with implementations of the Juvenile Justice Act in 2014. However, the concern is further that in Section 39, it allows, or the Juvenile Justice Act, it allows the PNG, the Royal PNG Constabulary to detain children below the age of 10 years, provided the officer in charge notifies the parent or a person. This enables police officers to potentially arrest a child at any age below the age or minimum age of criminal responsibility. So an opportunity that we look forward in terms of working towards these recommendations is to create and strengthen codes of conduct that has induction to train law enforcement personnel while dealing with sensitive cases of victims of abuse, especially women and children, and also raise minimum age of criminal responsibility of children from the age of 10 to 14 years of age. Looking at the rights of freedom of opinion, expression, and association and assembly, it's been estimated that 56% of women ages of 15 to 49 experience some degree of physical violence, and 28% experience some degree of sexual violence from the ages of 15. Given the geographical remoteness, and many communities make access to quality of services and support for survivors. In 2020, the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative was launched, and the GBV Parliamentary Committee was also established, which is a step forward in terms of dealing with gender-based violence in PNG. So a coordinated interagency response is widely recognized and most effective way of providing quality services to these affected. And so based on that recommendation, the United Nations sees an avenue that we can work together in this recommendation is to support and fund gender responsive justice and law enforcement sector reforms through measures including adoption of codes of conduct and capacity specializing in these different units, and also to maintain high level of commitment on the elimination of GBV by funding the National Secretariat in establishing provincial secretariats out at the provincial level. Looking at the area of the right to health, children's health continues to be under threat with one of the highest rates of child mortality in Asia Pacific region, and the maternal mortality ratio is significantly higher than the average of East Asia and the Pacific region. So this is extremely because of low access, coverage, and utilization of essential health services. An opportunity that the UN sees that we would continue to like to work with the government and our partners is to address the bottlenecks in access to healthcare and nutrition to ensure that the supply and coverage meets increasing use and demand for maternal and child health services, while strengthening national level coordination and across specifically nutrition specific and sensitive sector. Another area that is also not given a lot of priority is the accessibility to mental health support. There is a scarcity of mental health care in terms of counseling for counseling for functions as a form of mediation, and also support of survivors of sorcery related accusation, victims of domestic violence, and victims of gender-based violence. So that's also another opportunity that the UN would like to work with our partners and see that we can institutionalize and resource mental health care. It's one of the most important areas in quality specializing in mental health services. Looking at the environment, PNG has had a very comprehensive set of laws and policies, including the Forest Act, Fishery Management Act of 1998, and more recently, the Vision 2050 and the National Strategy for Responsive Sustainable Development. even though we have all these comprehensive policies in place, it's still a challenge in trying to implement and protect the environment. And also, there is a clear readiness of overall environment impact assessments involving natural resources and the concerns of extent which the state tries to address. And we've also seen that the civil society and indigenous groups and human rights defenders have been vocal about several issues, including the SA, the special agriculture business leases. And so we take note of all this and also of the recommendations, and the United Nations would like to recommend and also look forward in the next code cycle to improve reliable and accurate environmental monitoring and effective enforcement of environmental regulations, codes of practice, while integrating public environment concerns into the national policies. On the violence against children, the systematic data on violence against children is not widely available. However, recent estimates suggest that about 75% of children experience some form of violence during their childhood, often perpetrated within their homes and families. Another opportunity would that we, the UN, would like to propose and work together is to strengthen birth registration for children under the ages of 5 years, looking at the education sector and the challenges that is faced, meeting the adequate standards of quality. I would say a quarter of children from the ages of 6 to 18 are not in school because less than most of the population of PNG live in rural parts of PNG, and the disparities in access to schools and children from the poorest communities and rural areas enroll in schools, which gives the option of girls living in extremely remote areas would less chances of going to school rather than boys. One other opportunity that the UN sees and would like to work with our partners is to integrate gender equality into all levels of education and complete, adapt, and roll out the national out-of-school children strategy, particularly in remote and rural communities, to ensure access to education. With that, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, in conclusion, the United Nations is committed to support the work of the government of Papua New Guinea, the civil society, the churches, and all our stakeholders and partners in ensuring that PNG takes in these recommendations from the third cycle, and we will look forward to work in the next cycle for the next 4 years. And with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Josephine, for your contribution. Within the macro human rights issues that were addressed by other speakers, you have highlighted a few specific issues that deserve attention. I will mention just some, as the forced early marriage, the minimum age of criminal responsibility, sexual violence, including against a girl as young as 15 years old, children rights to health, was also another important issue, among other that are equally relevant. Finally, you have also reiterated the importance of partnership with the government and with other stakeholders, and your willingness as Office of High Commission to join efforts with all these stakeholders, which is again the key, the only path, I would say, to actually advance in implementation efforts. So thank you very much for bringing all those aspects to our attention again. Now, time flies, so in order to make the maximum of to optimize the time that we have left, I would like now to open the floor for questions from the audience. Before doing that, just very quickly a reminder and technical guidance about how to ask the questions. Just as a reminder, please type into the questions and answers box your questions, and in doing so, please indicate your name and the name of your organization, and indicate to which panelist specifically your question is addressed, both in the question and answers box, and also when you are taking the floor. We have now received already a few questions, which so I will now therefore give the floor to the people who wish to ask those questions, starting with Laurence Blattmer from Dominicans for Justice and Peace. Laurence, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Maria, and thanks a lot for the presentations that were very insightful. So I'm Laurence from Dominicans for Justice and Peace, and I would like to ask a question to Ms. Begura from the government. So my question would be the following. Following the third UPR of Papua New Guinea that took place very recently on the 4th of November, can you already provide some insights on the recommendations that the government plans to accept? And what are the human rights issue that you think will be prioritized at the implementation phase? And also in your presentation, you mentioned that Papua New Guinea will focus on strengthening the ties with NGOs during the implementation phase. So what concrete opportunities do you envisage to establish in close collaboration with civil society organizations? So those would be my two questions, and thank you once again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Laurence. Just a little clarification, if it's okay for all of you. I will take a few questions and then give the floor back to all the panelists to reply, if this is okay for everyone. This way we can try to maximize a little bit. Ms. Begura, is it okay for you if we proceed this way?
Yes, that's all right. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Then next on my list, I have Jan Pingel from Ocean Dialogue, who wishes to ask a question. Jan, you have the floor.
Okay, I hope now it works. Thanks a lot. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for all the panelists for their great presentations. I have a question to Mr. Jora, representing the European Union. Listening especially to the presentation by Reverend Roger Joseph, and given the recent global recognition by the Human Rights Council of the right to a healthy environment, as well as considering that France has addressed logging activities in one of their recommendations to Papua New Guinea. So my question is, what specific role can the European Union play to assist Papua New Guinea in implementing the recommendations related to the environment? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next on my list, I have Sara Garcia from Istituto Internazionale Maria Ausiliatrice. Sara, you have the floor.
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you so much for all the speakers. And I would say everybody gave a very comprehensive vision of the human rights situations of Papua New Guinea. But I would like to address my question particularly to Ms. Priscilla Pare. Mentioned some of the recommendations specifically address the issue of sorcery accusation-related violence during the UPR of PNG. Based on your experience, what actions are the most effective and efficient to address this serious and widespread issue and practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Brian Bond and Human Rights International. Brian, please, you have the floor.
Thanks, Maria, and thanks to the panelists. My question is to Ms. Mubagura. In its first review in 2011, Papua New Guinea accepted a recommendation to establish a database for people with disability with the objective of guiding relevant policies to make their rights effective. And it initiated a pilot project, which, however, was not completed. So my question is, how does Papua New Guinea intend to effectively ensure the rights of persons with disabilities, especially in view of its ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Now, Floriana Polito from Caritas Internationalis. Floriana, you have the floor. Floriana, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Now you can. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, sorry, I have problems with the audio this morning. No, thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you also to all the panelists. And I do have a question for Josephine Mann. And particularly, yes, I would like to know what type of collaboration can be envisaged between the UN, local NGOs, and also local authorities in the follow-up process. So in this follow-up period, and also I think Josephine, you have mentioned the support that the OHCHR is also willing to offer to local authorities and local NGOs in supporting the implementation of the recommendation. But it would be good to know, for example, what specific support can the OHCHR, but also other UN agencies provide locally, like, for example, also UNHCR, given that you have mentioned the right to refugees and asylum seekers. So it would be helpful to know what kind of support the OHCHR can offer and also other UN agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one last question from Eddie, if I'm not mistaken. You have the floor. Eddie, are you there? We cannot hear you. Yes. Please go ahead with Please go ahead with your question. We have a limited time in order to still give a chance to our panelists to reply. Thank you.
Yes, my question is directed to Reverend Rogers. A number of states have addressed environmental questions in the UPR recommendations. To your view, what are the major changes we need to see in PNG policy-wise to ensure that all business activities are based on a respect for fundamental human rights and environmental protection?
Thank you very much, Adi. All right, so I guess we do have maybe a couple of additional questions. We will see how to handle it, but now we really would like to give the floor to the panelists so that they can reply to those questions. I see that Dr. Jora has to leave a bit early than expected due to previous commitment already made. So I'm wondering, Dr. Jora, would you be available to maybe take
yes,
a couple of minutes reply? Perfect. That will give you
I'm
the
here in
floor
a car already, but okay, with a mask over my mouth, so but still
Thank
okay.
you so
So
much for the great effort. Then, please, you have the
the
floor.
question was with reference what the EU is planning to do in order to support the PNG government in safeguarding the environment and combating logging and so on. So all I have to say that the next budgetary perspective, 2021, 2027, so for the next 7 years, we have 3 main priorities. And priority number 1 is focused on forestry, biodiversity, and climate change nexus, which covers basically everything, and primary forestry. And from preservation to economic activities, sustainable economic activities, and combating the illegal activities. Everything is there. And this priority number 1 will absorb or has dedicated about 55% of the budgetary allocation for PNG. So it's the priority number 1 in line with our commitments adopting COP26 and now with Paris commitments and in line with PNG's own plans in Agenda 2050 and so on. And so it is a major priority. There will be money to be allocated. And of course, it's not only about money. We are also pushing political demarches, and we're also involved in supporting good governments and enforcing the law and order in PNG. So this goes together. So at the time being, I can only tell you this priority and financial allocation. We are not yet down to the project level, but perhaps next year we can also reveal a number of. There will be actually some project calls, and of course, human rights specific activities, including environmental rights, will have also dedicated financial envelope under the European Initiative for Democracy and Human Rights and other financial lines. So I hope I answered you at least partially your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much again for the effort to be with us despite you are moving around in the city, and thank you for all your contribution. We hope that you
in Port Moresby, not in any city.
Okay. Correct.
If you want to see the patrol, okay, behind. Okay.
Okay. So we will not ask you to make additional effort. So
no problem. Yes,
thank you.
Keep listening.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you so much. So I will now give the floor to Ms. Mubegura from the PNG government to also provide a few replies to the questions that were addressed to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and thank you very much for the questions which were asked by distinguished delegates. In terms of the questions from the Dominicans for Justice and Peace, I understand. If I can really recall correctly, there were 3 parts to this question: the indication of the recommendations that PNG would have already had in mind about or is preparing to accept. The other one, the priority areas that PNG would like to, the government would like to seek really prioritize and allocate in terms of resources and budget to improve. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing this. The areas of collaboration that PNG government seeks to establish with NGOs. So first of all, at this time, I cannot be able to really inform the meeting of the government's decision on which recommendations we have in mind to accept or which ones we may seek to reject. But we in this UPR review, there were 161 recommendations. This will go through the process of discussion by the UPR, as I have outlined in the conclusion of my discussion with you. And then we will go through the normal process of accepting these recommendations in written form to the UN. And then we will discuss with the rest of the stakeholders which recommendations we have accepted and which we want to seek to implement in the next 4 years. In terms of the recommendations or areas that the government would like to prioritize in the recommendations, I think for the government, our focus is to ensure that we want to see improvement in all areas of the human rights issues that we have been working on, which the UN Human Rights Council and member states have been assessing the progress for Papua New Guinea. We would like to see your recommendations that we have been given. We want to see progress in those areas that we have been asked to improve on, and the government is seeking the best way forward, or is working to ensure that resources appropriate the resource allocation and management of the resources to see improvement of all areas of the recommendations. There's no specific area that we would like to concentrate on or focus on that the government would seek to focus on, but the government's aim is to ensure that there is improvement in all areas. And the last is the areas of collaboration that the government seeks to establish with the civil society. We have realized that the civil society has information and is able to work closely with the communities better than the government or the relevant agencies of the government, and we can utilize those connections and networks that the civil society has with the societies, with the communities and other organizations. We found this when we were working on the UPR report with the help of the resident Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Port Moresby. And what we want to do, as I have outlined in my statement earlier this evening, is to have a social mapping of the civil society so that we can find out which civil society organizations deal with what specific issues. I think this is the best way we can match the resources and the civil society organizations and faith-based organizations with the relevant agencies. And maybe it would also be a point where the government is better informed of what the civil society agencies and development partners are doing in terms of addressing human rights issues, specific human rights issues, as under their own mandates, so that the government can find the best way to support these efforts and not be able to try to have a vague way of trying to address everything without knowing exactly what everyone else is doing on the ground. So the way forward for us would be to first begin with social mapping, civil society mapping, so that we will understand that work and try to match it to the agencies that work in those areas. That's the best way forward that we want. And then also because of the fact that the government is unable to be responsible for implementing all policies and legal frameworks that are in place in terms of addressing the human rights issues in the country. Most of these implementation tasks are taken on by the development partners in association with civil society and faith-based organizations. we need to find out how best the government can complement this effort. This hasn't been happening over the last 40 years of Papua New Guinea's independence. We've got to find a way to make changes to the way we've been doing things if we want to see improvement. I think that's the focus the government wants to take in terms of trying to collaborate with find areas and then to collaborate with the civil society and development partners. And that's the task the National Task Force will take on when we discuss what we want to do in the next 4 years. The other question that I have been asked is the establishment of a database, which the recommendation for establishment of a database on people living with disability. This was a recommendation in the one of the two previous UPR cycle reports. I cannot speak at this time of how this effort has been progressed, but if you would excuse me, I would seek the advice of my colleagues whose mandates fall within this area, so I can respond to this question appropriately in writing on a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Begura, for your replies. I would like now just to inform you that unfortunately, Reverend Roger had to leave, so he will not be able to reply to the question that was addressed to him, but we will be our job as organizer to forward the question and provide some elements or responses to the representative, the colleague who asked the question, so we'll be happy to do that. Now, we are a bit late with with the time allocated for this event. I would just kindly ask the participants if they can to grant 5-7 minutes more so that I can give the floor to Priscilla and then after her to Josephine to reply to the question that has been addressed to them. Priscilla, you have the floor. Thank you, Ms. Begura.
There is a lack of implementation of many of the initiatives that the government have already established. And we continue to create new policies and other strategies without revisiting the old ones that may have been not addressed earlier. So I think we should begin by implementing all other incentives already existing, such as the gender-based violence, the provincial centers that need to be set up resourcefully and make sure that they are off the ground. There are people working and monitoring and reporting on the progress of those centers, those GBV strategies, even the government's parliamentary committee. What are they going to do after they're set up? What are their priorities? How are they going to be a resource? What can they contribute towards addressing violence in Papua New Guinea, and violence, not only gender-based violence, but violence that's related to sorcery? I want to also highlight the fact that many people have lost faith in the justice system in Papua New Guinea to uphold the rule of law. And when I say that, there are certain systemic differences in Papua New Guinea. We're a cultural society and sorcery is normal, it's part of our lives. The problem is running to the justice system when you lose faith in the justice system because it's unaffordable, it's expensive, it's too far for anybody else to reach out to get assistance on time. That is not really effective at all at the moment. So if there is somebody who is running away from sorcery-related violence, even if the systems are there, you hardly find government presence. You only find local people's presence. For instance, in the sorcery-related violence cases, there are people who are known to who perform this serious violence, these atrocities on those who they already know. it's not done to them by other strangers. It's done to them by family members, community members, people who are already living there. So the only way out is the justice system, and we continue to be bombarded with systems that are not working for us in Papua New Guinea, and these systems need to pick up and start working for us so that we can have people who are committing such offenses stay longer time in jail and never have a lifetime of their own, rather than out of technicalities or some corruption-related justices that work in favor for few people in the country really make us lose interest, make people lose faith, and so live with the rest of their life suffering until they die. And there are many unreported cases which happens every day. I would like to go back to the Josephine Mann's report. While she's doing a fantastic job in answering some of those questions, I think that and also Ms. Mo Begura's response, and I think that we don't have to wait for the systems to work. We see abuses every day. Abuses are happening every day, but there are no government presence to be able to go down and stem those abuses and stop them immediately. We wait for resources all the time. Where is the money to take these people? Even partnership with civil society doesn't take millions of kina. It's just an initiative that needs to be started, and people in the government who own policies must make sure that those policies are implemented and realized, rather than leaving it to sectors. We are aware that there are resources that can be made available to government grants for people like, organizations in the civil society. So if you're an education NGO, there is an education department that should at least have some budget already out to make sure that you are being resourced to be able to carry out the similar activities, and in other sectors like environment. That kind of collaboration does not exist. So if there is a person who is suffering from sorcery-related violence or gender-based violence, this is the system that doesn't collaborate in order to make everything flows through and get the person's need to be addressed. We have a very what you call disintegrated systems, no connections at all. Still waiting for the next level to address this issue because the policy says so, or the person that you want to see is not in the office, the number that you're calling. These systemic problems are actually making life difficult for addressing sustainable development through changing livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Josephine, would you like to add a few remarks as well? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would probably conclude with the question that was asked to me in regards to what type of support the United Nations gives to our partners. Basically, our mandated role is to serve the member states, which is basically the people of Papua New Guinea, through its government and its partners. So under the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, which is a blueprint that we operate under, most of the programs and work that we do is based around the partnership with the government, and also taking into consideration and focusing mostly around our sustainable development goals. And so in terms of the recommendations of the UPR, most, or I would say all of the recommendations are basically focused around the work or the support that we give in terms of implementation of assisting the government and our partners in all aspects of the recommendations, from basically all rights across, because human rights is cross-cutting at all aspects. Where there are humans, there are issues surrounding the rights of humans. So that's the type of support that we give to the people of Papua New Guinea through implementation of our programs through our various 18 agencies that we operate under the United Nations country team. In terms of particularly the reporting and tracking of the UPR process, we give technical assistance, training to and support financially and technical as well to the government partners and also the civil society. For example, we're currently running a training now based on business and human rights that we're supporting with our partner, an NGO who runs the training for most of our human rights defenders and the civil society groups. Basically, teaching them about issues surrounded around environment, businesses, and human rights defenders, and based on discussions on the recommendation of the UPR. So we tend to continue to give that support in different thematic areas that we operate and work under with the government as well as our partners. I can't really go into detail because there's a lot of areas that we cover, but that's the kind of assistance that we try to provide to the people of Papua New Guinea. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Josephine. I see that we have used even the extra time that we agreed on. So it has been a very good exchange, and we are really grateful for all the inputs that you have provided, as well as for the participation, and most importantly for the work that colleagues in PNG, including NGO colleagues, are carrying out on a daily basis. It's a pity we have to stop the discussion, but it is what it is. We will convene some pending questions and comments to the speakers, hoping for some follow-up in writing afterwards, so that we give satisfaction to those that could not actually receive any reply. As an information and executive summary of this event will also be prepared and disseminated among all of you. And I have nothing else left but to thank you again, the Ville de Genève and Ms. Nkara, for making this event possible, and to all of you as well. Without you, obviously, we could not have this discussion. And we look forward for join our efforts and continue working together to improve the human rights situation in PNG. Many thanks to all of you. I so close this webinar. Have a good evening and a good morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.